Chapter 5. Know thy shadow, know thyself. Within each of us lies a solid gold treasure. This golden essence is our spirit, pure and magnificent, open and glowing. But this gold has been covered up by a hard shell of clay. The clay comes from our fear. It is our social mask, the face we show the world. Unconcealing your shadow reveals your mask. We must look at this mask with love and compassion, for there is great value in understanding what we hide behind. Consider the story of the Golden Buddha. In 1957, a monastery in Thailand was being relocated, and a group of monks was put in charge of moving a giant clay Buddha. In the midst of the move, one of the monks noticed a crack in the Buddha. Concerned about damaging the idol, the monks decided to wait for a day before continuing with their task. When night came, one of the monks came to check on the giant statue. He shined his flashlight over the entire Buddha. When he reached the crack, he saw something reflected back to him. The monk, his curiosity aroused, got a hammer and a chisel and began chipping away at the clay Buddha. As he knocked off piece after piece of clay, the Buddha got brighter and brighter. After hours of work, the monk looked up in amazement to see standing before him a huge, solid gold Buddha. Many historians believe the Buddha had been covered with clay by Thai monks several hundred years earlier before an attack by the Burmese army. They covered the Buddha to keep it from being stolen. In the attack, all the monks were killed, so it wasn't until 1957, when the monks were moving the giant statue, that the great treasure was discovered. Like the Buddha, our outer shell protects us from the world. Our real treasure is hidden within. We human beings unconsciously hide our inner gold under a layer of clay. All we need to do to uncover our gold is have the courage to chip away at our outer shell, piece by piece. In my seminars, I often work with people who have invested in years of therapy, transformational seminars, breath work, and other healing modalities. They ask the same questions. When will it end? When will I be done? How much more work must I do on these issues that come up over and over again? These people are not looking at themselves as magnificent Buddhas encased in clay shells. These people hate their shells. They haven't discovered that their clay shells protect them in more ways than they can imagine. We need our shells for many reasons, and for each of us, the reasons may be different. Even though our ultimate goal is to shed our shells, we first need to understand and make peace with these masks. Do you think after the monks chiseled the shell off the gold Buddha, the Buddha angrily said, "I hated that horrible shell"? Or do you think the Buddha blessed the shell that served to protect him from being stolen away from his home? When I was young, my outer shell was tough, uncaring, and insensitive. Saying I've got it all together hid my feelings of inadequacy and gave me the illusion that I was okay. As I chiseled away at my shell piece by piece, my shining essence began to emerge. But it was not until I could distinguish those aspects that made up my shell as a cover-up for many hidden emotions that I was able to see past my tough exterior. Once I started looking through the cracks, I was able to let go of my shell. And when I came to appreciate and respect this hard shell for protecting me, my life was transformed. Your outer shell is the you who faces the world. It hides the characteristics that make up your shadow. Our shadows are so well disguised that we often show the world one face, when in fact the exact opposite is really within us. Some people wear a layer of toughness that hides their sensitivity, or a mask of humor to cover up their sadness. People who know it all are usually covering up feelings of stupidity, while those who act arrogantly have yet to reveal their insecurity. The cool people are hiding the geek within, and the smiling face an angry one. We have to look beyond our social masks in order to discover our authentic selves. We are masters of disguise, fooling others, but also fooling ourselves. It's the lies we tell ourselves that we need to decipher. When we're not completely satisfied, happy, healthy, or fulfilling our dreams, we know these lies are in our way. This is how we recognize our shadow at work. The shift that needs to occur is perceptual. You need to see your outer shell as having served as protection, not just something that keeps you from fulfilling your dreams. Your outer shell is divinely designed to guide your spiritual process. By revisiting and exploring each incident, emotion, and experience that led you to construct that shell, you'll be guided back home to embrace the totality of your being. Our shells are the roadmap to our personal growth. They are made up of all that we are and all that we don't want to be. No matter how painful your past or present might be, if you look at yourself truthfully and use the information stored in your outer shell as a guide, it will lead you in your journey towards enlightenment. When you get to know your whole self, you will no longer need your shell to protect you. You will naturally allow your masks to fall away, exposing your authentic self to the world. You will not have to pretend that you're more or less than anyone else. Everyone in the world can become your peer. Our shells are created from our ego ideal. The ego is the self distinguished from other. Spirit combines self and other as one. When this union between spirit and self occurs, we become one with ourselves and one with the world. Most people don't get very far unconcealing their shadow because they're unwilling to be honest with themselves. The ego doesn't enjoy losing control. The moment you acknowledge all aspects of yourself, the good and the bad, the ego begins to feel a loss of power. In the Tibetan book of Living and Dying, Sojal Rinpoche explains that the ego is our false and ignorantly assumed identity. So ego, then, is the absence of true knowledge of who we really are, together with its result, a doomed clutching on at all costs to a cobbled together and makeshift image of ourselves, an inevitably chameleon charlatan self that keeps changing and has to keep alive the fiction of its existence. If you begin the process of unconcealing your shadow and a voice inside starts screaming for you to stop, know that it's only your ego fearing its own death. Give yourself permission to uncover your true self. Challenge the person you think you are in order to unveil the person you are capable of becoming. Using other people as mirrors helps you to decipher your mask. Go out and interview people close to you, friends, lovers, families, and colleagues. Ask them which 3 things they like the most about you and which 3 things they like the least. It's important for the people you're asking to know it's okay for them to be honest. You're the only one who can make it safe for others to tell you the truth. Find out if you appear to others the way you appear to yourself. Other people often see more positive aspects in us than we see in ourselves. And at the same time, they see more negative traits than we see or admit to ourselves. People often resist this exercise. They fear being judged. The word judgment carries a lot of baggage, so I prefer to use the word feedback. Feedback is a useful tool. We never have to believe what others think about us, but if we are afraid to hear what the people closest to us have to say, we should take notice. Most people are afraid they will hear what they fear most. This is denial at work. Think of denial as the acronym for Don't Even Notice I Am Lying. We only fear feedback if we know on some level that we're lying to ourselves. If you honestly feel that what someone thinks about you has no basis in reality, you won't care. We care when we've been deceiving ourselves and get called on it. Take Kate, for example. Kate came to do some work with me, and when I asked her to do this exercise, many of the people she interviewed said she lacked integrity. She was baffled because her whole life, as she saw it, had been about being honest at all costs. Knowing how this process works, I was sure the people around her perceived some aspect of Kate that she had hidden from herself. I asked her to close her eyes and allow images to come to her mind whenever I asked her a question. After we consciously took several deep breaths together, I put on some music and began to guide her through a visualization. I asked her to go for a walk in a garden and had her imagine beautiful plants, trees, and flowers there. When Kate was relaxed and comfortable, I asked her to remember a time where she had been dishonest, a time when she had lied or cheated, a time when she had no integrity. We sat in silence, and then tears began rolling down her cheeks. When Kate finally spoke, she recounted this story. Kate had wanted to be a doctor her entire life. She had finished her last year of medical school and was in her 3rd month of residency at a large hospital in New Orleans. It was dinner time in the hospital and everyone was busy. Kate was in a hurry too. She was making rounds, looking in on her patients. She entered a woman's room and decided she wanted to flush a line around the woman's heart with saline. Kate couldn't find a nurse to help, so she rushed down the hall herself to get a tube of saline solution. Without looking at the tube a nurse had given her, Kate injected the solution into the line. Halfway through the procedure, the woman whom she was injecting the fluid into went into a seizure. Shocked, Kate looked down at the tube in her hand and saw the label said potassium chloride. She stopped the injection immediately and stabilized the woman until she came out of the seizure. By this time, many of the staff doctors had come to try to figure out what happened to this patient. Kate had already hidden the tube. She was horrified. Because she broke one of the fundamental rules taught in medical school, never give medicine to a patient without first checking the label, she could have killed or seriously injured this woman. When the doctor asked Kate what happened, she lied and said she didn't know. Until this moment, Kate had never told anyone this story. In fact, she had never thought about it since the day she finished her residency and left that hospital. On that terrible day, Kate swore that she would never make a medical mistake again. In the 16 years since that incident, Kate became a world-famous physician and author, proud of her integrity and full of distaste for anyone with standards lower than her own. But in her personal life, what kept coming up was Kate's friends questioning her integrity. Because she disowned this part of herself, buried it long ago, she was blind to it. Kate wore a mask of integrity to hide the part of herself that was deceitful. She had fooled herself into believing her own disguise. This single act of dishonesty, which Kate had not come to terms with, took on a life of its own. When she lied to others in her relationships, she was unable to see it. She complained that she was always being misunderstood, and despite all her accomplishments, Kate was never satisfied with her life. She feared intimate relationships, keeping her friends at arm's length to make sure no one discovered her secret. She thought she loved herself, but after our work together, she could see there was a part she hated, an aspect of herself that once caused her shame and humiliation. Once Kate was able to see and own her lack of integrity, a light went on inside her. She was now able to see the other places in her life where she lied to herself or to others. When we finished our work, Kate looked years younger. She was able to release the giant lies she suppressed in herself. She felt light and free, but didn't understand why. This is how I explained her physical sensation of release. Think for a moment about how much energy it takes to hide something from yourself and the world. Try taking a piece of fruit, say a grapefruit, and carry it around in your hand the whole day. Keep the grapefruit out of your own sight and make sure when you are around other people that you hide the grapefruit so that they cannot see it. After a few hours, notice how much energy you're expending. This is what our bodies have to do all day long. Except they don't have just one piece of fruit. They have to deal with all of the pieces of fruit you're trying to hide from yourself and from the world. When you finally allow these truths about yourself to surface, you'll be free. You'll have all that excess energy to spend on your personal growth and on the path to achieve your highest goals. We are only as sick as our secrets. These secrets make it impossible for us to be our authentic selves. But when you make peace with yourself, the world will mirror back that same level of peace. When you're in harmony with yourself, you'll be in harmony with everyone else. Other people listen to what you're saying and see what you're doing. But they are also conscious of your body language and whether or not it contradicts what you say and do. So it's important to look closely at what you're physically communicating to others. As Emerson said, "Who you are speaks so loud I can't hear what you're saying." What are you saying when you're not speaking? Our body language, our facial expressions, and the energy we give off are constantly sending out messages. Recent studies show that 86% of our communications are nonverbal. That means that only 14% of what you say verbally makes any difference to those you are speaking to. You want to ask yourself, what am I communicating in the silence? What are the messages I am sending out? Do I have a smile on my face when I feel sad? Do I look mad when I'm telling you how great my life is? Do I believe I'm in great shape when my mirror tells me something else? Can I look into my eyes and feel good about what I am seeing, or do I run away? These are often difficult questions to confront. You have to give yourself the freedom to not like your answers, because inevitably there will be unpleasant ones. But they'll be the most useful. Recently, I worked with a group of people who were being trained to lead seminars on healing. We were videotaping everyone so that they could see how they appeared to other people. An attractive young woman named Sandra got up to speak. While her words were beautiful, all I could take in was the way she swayed, her slow, sensual movements that flirted with the audience. When she finished her talk, I asked her how she thought people perceived her. She replied as competent and loving. When we asked the rest of the group, they made comments like cute, sexy, has a lot of attention on herself. I told her that if I were a man, I'd want to have a drink with her after the seminar. As a woman, I might be offended by her sexy movements. Everything she was doing was distracting us from what she was trying to communicate. Sandra's goal was to provide people with information so that they could heal themselves. But all we could hear her saying was, "Look at how beautiful and sexy I am. Do you like me? Do you find me attractive?" All this was unspoken, but nonetheless, the audience was thinking about Sandra's body instead of the message she wanted us to hear. We played back Sandra's video without any sound, and she was shocked by what she was communicating. When I asked her why she thought she was doing this, she said because she wanted people to like her, and she got her power by attracting men to her. The truth was that her body language was actually depleting her power. Sandra had been studying for years to be a healer. Now she finally had the opportunity to speak in front of large groups, and she was presenting them with her mask rather than her message. Sandra was more than willing to see and hear the truth, even though she felt angry and embarrassed by her performance. She worked hard on owning her silent communications and the part of herself that needed so much approval from men. As soon as she uncovered this aspect of herself, Sandra was able to embrace it and subsequently became a great speaker who could fulfill her dream of helping people. Interviewing others to find out how they perceive you is a scary process. But every bit of feedback is a blessing. It takes courage and commitment to see all of yourself. If you're unwilling to hear the truth, you'll be unable to transform your life. People often go through a kind of grieving process after they've discovered parts of themselves that had been hidden for a long time. If you've been fooling yourself about your level of self-love, you've got to let yourself feel sad or angry for a while. Remember, the core of your being, the whole of who you are, doesn't change as you transfer certain emotions and impulses to your shadow. You never actually become a different person. The true, wonderful you always exists way down deep inside. So coming to terms with your shadow is a way of remembering who you really are. Now that we've received feedback from others, let us continue the process of unconcealing our shadow. Another way to expose your hidden aspects is to make a list of 3 people you admire and of 3 people you hate. The people you admire should inspire you with qualities you'd like to emulate. The people you don't like should get you really angry or upset. They would have done something which you find horrifying. The lists do not have to include people you know, although they can. They can also be politicians, actors, writers, philanthropists, musicians, or killers. After you've made your list, write down the 3 qualities you like or admire most about each person, and those you dislike or hate the most. Then on a separate sheet of paper, make a list of all the positive qualities of the people you admire on one side and the negative qualities you dislike on the other. My lists look like this: Martin Luther King Jr., visionary, courageous, honorable. Jacqueline Onassis, elegant, successful leader. Ariel Ford, my sister, spiritual, creative, powerful. On my negative list, Charles Manson, predator, fearful, hateful. Hitler, murderer, prejudice, evil. Harriet Spiegel, an old teacher, arrogant, know-it-all, angry. My positive list, I had visionary, courageous, honorable, elegant, successful, leader, spiritual, creative, powerful. And on my negative list was predator, hateful, fearful, murderer, evil, prejudice, arrogant, know-it-all, angry. These lists are a good place to find disowned aspects of yourself. Carefully go over each trait you've listed. I like to start with the negative traits first. In the beginning, you might have trouble seeing how you have the same traits as someone like Hitler. It's important to break down any general word like murderer. The question to ask is, what kind of person would commit these acts? For example, for murderer, you might say selfish, enraged, doesn't value human life. If you come up with a phrase like doesn't value human life, then ask yourself what kind of person has no value for human life. You might come up with sick, demented, and narcissistic. The important part of this process is to break the language down until you get to a specific word or a quality that you hate or dislike. Find the qualities that give you an emotional charge. Determine what plugs you in. Stephen, a successful business consultant who came to one of my seminars, had been meditating for 8 years and made a real commitment to alter his life. He hadn't had a relationship for the past 5 years and was ready to find a partner, get married, and start a family. He felt ready to dig inside himself and to try to find out why he'd been so unsuccessful in love. By the second day, Stephen had unconcealed many aspects of himself, but there was still one thing bothering him. On the break, he called me over to tell me there was a gentleman in the seminar he could not stand. I asked him what he disliked so much about this other man. He only thought about it for a second, then whispered in my ear, "He's a wimp, and I hate wimps." I didn't say a word, but stood there quietly until Stephen was ready to speak. There was a glimmer of recognition in his eyes as he told me the story. When Stephen was 5 years old, his father had wanted him to go on a pony ride. They were at a state fair with his entire family. Stephen had never seen a real pony and was awfully scared of this big animal. When Stephen told his father he didn't want to go on the pony ride because he was scared, his father had scolded him. "What kind of man are you going to make? You're nothing but a little wimp. You're an embarrassment to our family." Stephen was punished. Since that day, Stephen made a decision. After some thought, he said he was a wimp about women. He was afraid of women, of communicating honestly with them. So whenever there was a problem in a relationship, Stephen just left. He'd left almost every woman he'd ever been in a relationship with. And at this point, he was even scared to ask attractive women out. I told Stephen to take some time to fully feel his shame and embarrassment. When I asked Stephen what the good thing was about being a wimp, he looked at me like I was crazy. He couldn't comprehend how something this horrifying, something he'd spent his whole life denying, could be a gift. But then Stephen remembered a time when being a wimp had probably saved his life. When he was in college, a group of his friends had gotten together to do some drinking. They'd been going at it for a couple of hours when one of the guys suggested going to a bar in the next town. Stephen's 3 other friends decided they should all go. Stephen was scared to drive drunk or to be in the car with anyone who was drinking and driving, so he told his buddies he had a date and was going to get laid. He didn't want to tell them he was scared to go. He didn't want to be a wimp. 2 hours later, his friends drove off the road. One of Stephen's closest friends was killed, and the other 3 were seriously injured. Stephen couldn't believe what he was remembering. He had blocked this painful incident from his mind. At the time of the accident, he figured it was just luck that he had skipped out that night. I asked him if there were other times when being a wimp had kept him out of trouble. He could see now how this trait had made him a cautious man, had kept him out of fights, and had probably saved him from all kinds of trouble. We talked about many past incidents before I asked Stephen how he felt about being a wimp now. His face lit up. He had embraced it. He could see now that this aspect of himself had been valuable many times. Stephen could now be proud of it. The shame and the pain disappeared. Stephen's new perspective empowered him. We do not have any say about the events of our lives, Nietzsche commented, but we do have say over how we interpret them. Interpretation can really ease our emotional pain. Inventing interpretations is a creative act. As soon as Stephen could love and respect his wimpiness, he was able to stop projecting it onto other men. Instead of being repelled by wimpy behavior, he could be informed by it. Later in the course, Stephen got to know the man that he thought was a wimp. He was amazed at how different this man seemed to him. Had Stephen changed that much? Or had this man changed in only a couple of hours? When Stephen owned being a wimp, it changed the lenses he looked through. Now he could see clearly. Letting go of his need to be macho, Stephen could accept his sensitivity, shyness, and cautiousness. It let him open his heart and allowed people to get close to him. Unconcealing is the first step of the shadow process. Unconcealing requires rigorous honesty and willingness to see what you haven't been able to see. Acknowledgement of our shadow self begins the process of integration and healing. Remember that each of these negative traits has a positive gift for you, more value than you can ever imagine. It's only a matter of doing the work, and in a short while, you'll receive the blessings of wholeness, happiness, and freedom. Exercises. 1. Here's a list of negative words. Take a few minutes and identify any words that have an emotional charge for you. Say out loud, I am, and fill in the blank. If you can say it without any emotional charge, then move on to the next word. Write down the words that you dislike or react to. If you are not sure that the word has any charge for you, close your eyes for a minute and meditate on the word. Repeat it to yourself a few times out loud and ask yourself how you'd really feel if someone you respected called you this word. If you'd be angry or upset, write it down. Also, spend some time thinking about words that are not on this list that run your life or cause you pain. Greedy, liar, phony, cheap, hateful, jealous, vindictive, controlling, nasty, possessive, bitchy, wimp, evil, geek, prudish, womanizer, angry, secretive, predator, addict, sick, fat, disgusting, stupid, idiot, fearful, unconscious, masochist, unimportant, shyster, compulsive, frigid, rigid, abuser, manipulator, victim, victimizer, egocentric, better than, foolish, emotional, pompous, ugly, sloppy, loudmouth, passive-aggressive, coward, jerk, inauthentic, inappropriate, dead, irresponsible, incompetent, lazy, opportunist, lush, stingy, dumb, immature, desperate, childish, gold digger, hormonal, cruel, needy, scary, perverted, mean, defensive, sad, arrogant, slut, deceitful, judgmental, martyr, hypocrite, wasteful, anxious, sadistic, worthless, loser, failure, envious, sleazy, inflexible, devious, ignorant, so just breathe in and allow yourself to be present to any other words that might go on your list that plug you in, that upset you, and write them down. Number 2, imagine that an article was written about you in your local newspaper. What are the 5 things you would not want to be said about you? Write them down. Now try to imagine 5 things they would say about you that wouldn't matter to you at all. The question is, are the first 5 things true and the second 5 untrue? Or have you decided with the help of your family and friends that the first 5 things are the wrong things to be, therefore you do not want them said about you? We must uncover what's behind these words so we can take back these disowned parts of ourselves. So write down the judgments you have about each of these words. See if you can identify when you first made that judgment or whom you took the judgment from. Was it your mother, your father, another family member? Chapter 6, I Am That. Once we have unconcealed all of our disowned aspects, We are ready to move into the second stage of the process, which is to own all of these traits. By own, I mean acknowledge that a quality belongs to you. Now we can begin to take responsibility for all of who we are, the parts we like, and the parts we dislike. At this point, you don't have to like all of your aspects. You just have to be willing to acknowledge them to yourself and others. There are 3 helpful questions you can ask yourself. Have I ever demonstrated that behavior in the past? Am I demonstrating that behavior now? Under different circumstances, am I capable of demonstrating that behavior? Once you answer yes to any of these questions, you have started the process of owning a trait. Some traits are easier to acknowledge than others. Aspects of ourselves that we've tried hardest to deny or have projected on someone else are the hardest to own. They take more time, but it's just as important to be ruthless with yourself as it is to be gentle. Be willing to find out that you are what you least want to be. Be determined to look with new eyes past the defense mechanisms which only want to say, I am not that. Look through eyes that say, I am that. Where am I that? Resist the temptation to judge yourself. Don't jump to conclusions and decide you're an awful person if you find out that you're selfish or jealous. We all possess these qualities, as well as their polar opposites. They are a part of our humanity. All of our emotions and impulses, the ones we call positive, the ones we call negative, are there to guide us and teach us. You may be skeptical, but give yourself the opportunity to get to know all these aspects and find their gifts. I promise that you will find gold at the end of this process. Owning is an essential step in the process of healing, of creating a life you love. We can't embrace that which we don't own. If you want to manifest your full potential, you have to reclaim the parts of yourself that you've denied, hidden, or given away to others. When I was in the beginning stages of my own healing process, I could never find the right man. No one I ever wanted seemed to want me. I went through men like most people go through magazines. I was attracted to men who weren't right for me because I didn't know who I was and because I was cut off from so many beautiful aspects of myself. The one man whom I really love actually told me that he couldn't stay with me because he knew one day I would realize who I was and leave him. My friends could see that the men I picked were wrong for me, but I still believed I was a small 2-bedroom house that needed work. So everything and everyone around me kept mirroring back to me my own lack of self-love. Once I owned more aspects of myself, my fear, my covertness, my grandiosity, I no longer had to attract partners who were fearful, covert, and grandiose. It became easier for me to attract men who could mirror back the positive aspects of myself, men who were kind, giving, and who loved and accepted me as I am. If there is an aspect of ourselves that we don't accept, we'll continually attract people in our lives who act out that aspect. The universe will keep trying to show us who we really are and to help make us whole again. Most of us have buried these disowned aspects so deep we can't see where we could possibly be a particular kind of person that we look at with distaste. However, if a particular type of person keeps showing up in your life, it's for a reason. For years, every time my friend Joanna went on a date, she would tell me, "He's not for me, he's a geek." The first 6 or 7 times it happened, I didn't say a word. But after a while, it became too obvious. I finally suggested to Joanna that she was the geek. I told her that if she owned the geek in herself, she wouldn't find herself dating geeks anymore. She thought I was crazy. I pointed out that I never went out with geeks. How was it possible that all the men she met had this quality which she disliked so much? So the geek stories went on for months. It became almost comical because the dynamic was so clear to me and so hidden from Joanna. Then very late one night, I got a call from Joanna, who had finally had it. After a date with yet another geek, she was really in pain and asked me to explain to her how she was a geek. I gently suggested that sometimes when she wore those little pink socks with her white leather sneakers, people might consider her geeky. She half laughed and made me promise that if she owned the geek in herself, she would no longer have to date them. She agreed to make a list of all the times in her life she had been a geek. The next day, Joanna called me with a long list of geeky things she'd said and done. Because she didn't want to be a geek, Joanna had constructed a cool facade. She had been living that way for more than 20 years. But when she looked closely, she was able to see that geekiness did rear its ugly head once in a while. By discovering those geeky moments in her life and being able to laugh about them with me, Joanna could see that being a bit of a geek wasn't so bad. And since she owned her geekiness 2 years ago, I can honestly tell you she hasn't been out with a single geek. When she looked to see what her geekiness had given her, Joanna saw that out of her desire not to be a geek, she had manufactured a public persona who was cool, chic, and elegant. It was Joanna's geekiness and her response to it that had enabled Joanna to create a beautiful style of her own. There are lots of ways to tackle owning your traits. Start by concentrating on qualities that offend you. Take out your list of words that describe the people you dislike or hate and examine each trait. No matter how resistant you are, you must own each of these traits in order for the process to work. Find a place in your life where you've displayed this trait or where someone else might have perceived you as embodying this trait. Try on each trait like you would a jacket. See how it feels and figure out what you have to do to make it fit. Imagine how you would react if you were called that word by someone you love. You have to examine what judgments you make about each trait itself and what judgments you make about people who possess each trait. Look at how many people you've dismissed for having this aspect. Don't try to compare yourself favorably to these people or to differentiate your behavior from theirs. Don't let your ego try to justify your own behavior. Remember, the world sees a geek as a geek. A man who attended one of my courses loved the concept of being all things, of having the world within him. Bill was in his late 50s and really only had problems with one person in his life, his 22-year-old son. When I asked what it was that upset him most about his son, Bill said his son was a liar, whose constant lying to him was, in his estimation, the worst thing anyone could do. "I've never told a lie my entire life," Bill said. "Ask anyone who knows me." He was so charged up that his face was bright red. For a good 15 minutes, I was unable to help him acknowledge that he ever lied in the past or was capable of lying in the future. Everyone in the course was growing impatient with Bill. The rest of us were able to recall at least 100 times that we had lied as children, teenagers, or adults, not to mention how often we lied to ourselves. But Bill was still not budging. Then I asked Bill if he ever cheated a little on his tax returns. A huge smile crossed his face, and with his finger pointing directly at me, he said, "That's a different kind of lying." Everyone in the class looked at him with disbelief. I'm sorry to say that Bill is one of the few people who took my course but never worked his way through it. James Baldwin, a Jungian analyst, said, "One can only face in others what one can face in oneself." Bill had made his son so wrong for lying and was so self-righteous in his opinion of liars that he was unwilling to discover this aspect in himself. He had too much invested in being right. If Bill had been able to own the aspect of himself that was a liar, he would have been able to unplug himself from his son. It takes compassion to own a part of yourself that you've previously disowned, ignored, hated, denied, or judged in others. It takes compassion to accept being human and having every aspect of our humanity within you, good and bad. Ultimately, when you open your heart to yourself, you will find you have compassion for everything and everybody. Last year, a man named Hank came to one of my courses. His big issue was his girlfriend, who was always late. He shared lots of incidents with the group that had upset him. I suggested the reason Hank was so upset was that his girlfriend was mirroring an aspect of himself. He told us there was absolutely no way this was possible, though it was quite obvious to everyone in the class that Hank couldn't live with this aspect of his girlfriend. His face was full of disgust when he related how she had stood him up earlier that day, so his feelings were close to the surface. It was the beginning of the seminar, and I didn't want to rush Hank, so I simply told him, "What you can't be with won't let you be." Hank could see he was having trouble accepting his girlfriend's lateness and that he was emotionally plugged in. But when I asked him if he was the kind of person who was ever late, Hank's answer was absolutely not. We moved on, going through various exercises, but 24 hours later, I could see Hank was still struggling. As the group came back from the second night's dinner break, we noticed that one chair was empty. I had asked everyone to come back from breaks promptly so we wouldn't waste any valuable time. We were trying to figure out who was missing when someone said, "It's Hank." We waited a few minutes, but Hank was nowhere in sight, so we decided to get started. Just then, a woman in the front row looked at me and said, "I don't know if you've noticed, but Hank has been late coming back from every break. I, for one, am sick of waiting for him." Suddenly, we all realized that Hank was doing to us what his girlfriend did to him. He was making us wait. When Hank arrived 10 minutes later, I stopped what we were doing to see if Hank was ready to have a breakthrough. I asked him if he realized he'd been late coming back from every break. He looked at me and said, "I'm only a few minutes late. What's the problem?" Everyone in the room gasped in disbelief. I replied, "Hank, you are the only person in the room who has been consistently late from 5 breaks. Some people feel offended that we have to waste time and energy checking to see who's late and then waiting a few minutes to see if you're coming back before we can get started. Can you see any correlation between what you're doing to us and what your girlfriend does to you?" Hank refused to see that his being a few minutes late, meaning anywhere from 3 to 15 minutes, was a problem. He told us his girlfriend was often 2 hours late, or even an entire day late. That, he said, is late. That is a problem. Hank had rationalized a fundamental difference between being 5 minutes late and being several hours late. For him, they were two distinct issues. I asked for a show of hands to see how many people agreed. No one raised a hand. Then I asked how many people felt Hank was being rude by not coming back on time. Everyone raised his or her hand. It was clear to everyone in the room except Hank that he was doing to us what his girlfriend did to him. Late is late, a geek is a geek. It's the ego that makes the distinction to protect itself. Someone stood up and told Hank they did everything in their power to be on time, and they expected other people to do the same. I added that if someone in my life is constantly late and doesn't try to break themselves of the habit, I stop making plans with them. I also told Hank that when someone is consistently late, I feel like the underlying message they are giving me is my time is not valuable, or that their time is more important than mine. Hank looked upset and perplexed. I asked him to go home that night and think about what we were saying. The next morning, Hank came in on time. He said that he stayed up half the night making a list of all the times he'd been late in the past year. He realized that he was almost always late, but he had believed that as long as he was not more than a half hour behind schedule, he was doing great. That day, in front of all of us, Hank owned that he was late and that being late was rude. He was still angry at his girlfriend, but he could see that in his own way he was doing to us what was being done to him. Hank had buried this aspect of himself so deeply that it was completely hidden from his awareness. Rudeness did not fit into his ego ideal, but as soon as he owned his lateness and rudeness, Hank's face relaxed. He had a natural internal surrender. He could now be with more aspects of himself. And when he spoke about his girlfriend's behavior, it was no longer with total frustration. Hank could see the benefits of taking back his projections from her and owning his own traits. He was becoming free to choose whether he wanted to be in a relationship with a woman who was constantly late. Hank believed he was a caring, responsible person, but he had needed to attract a particular kind of woman to show him the hidden aspects of himself. People mirror back what is within us because subconsciously we are calling it forth from them. That's why certain kinds of people and situations keep showing up in our lives over and over again. The miracle occurs when you truly own and embrace an aspect of yourself. At that point, the person who is serving as your mirror will either stop acting out the behavior, or you will become able to choose not to have this person in your life. When you unplug, you no longer need another person to mirror your shadow back to you. Because you'll be more whole yourself, you'll naturally gravitate to those who reflect your wholeness. If our soul's purpose is to become complete, we'll continually call forth what we need to see to be whole. As we own more of ourselves, healthier people will show up in our lives. Take your time in considering what you don't want to own. When resistance to owning something shows up, don't skip over it. Search around until you can see where the resistance comes from. Notice what judgments you make. Write down the times when you've displayed this trait. If you have trouble, enlist a friend to help you. Remember that if you zero in on an unlikable aspect of someone else, it's because you have the same aspect. In my seminars, when someone gets stuck on a particular trait and can't seem to own it, I have them own being a resistant ass. This usually makes people laugh. And when they can be with the resistant ass in themselves, they usually can move quickly through the word that gives them resistance. The hardest words to own are always related to incidents where we feel someone has wronged us. Our egos resist owning characteristics that would make us give up blaming someone else for the condition of our life. Most of us have spent a long time building cases against the people who have harmed us. Oprah Winfrey once said in a commencement speech, "Turn your wounds into wisdom." Instead of holding on to resentments, learn from them. Look to see how you've benefited from your wounds. Where have they led you? Who is in your life now that might not have been if you hadn't had a particular bad experience? And how does holding on to your wounds keep you from fulfilling your dreams? When you use wounds to grow and learn, you don't have to continue to be the victim. Look at the person who has harmed you. Examine what aspects of this person plug you in. And when you can find those things within yourself, you will no longer be attached to or affected by the other person. There is a Zen story about two monks journeying home who come to the banks of a fast-flowing river. When they reach the riverside, they see a young woman unable to cross. One of the monks picks her up in her arms, carries her through the current, and sets her safely on the other side. Then the two monks continue on their travels. Finally, the monk who crossed the river alone can restrain himself no longer, and he begins to rebuke his brother. "You know it is against our rules to touch a woman. You have broken our holy vows." The other monk answers, "Brother, I left that young woman on the banks of the river. Are you still carrying her?" When you hold on to old wounds, you continue down the road carrying that burden. Recently, I worked with a beautiful young woman named Morgan who had stomach cancer. When she came to see me, she had little desire to live and was resigned that her cancer would take her life. Morgan was filled with anger. She hated her mother for the continual cycle of emotional and physical abuse that characterized their relationship. Even though she was in her early 30s and had tried many self-improvement seminars, Morgan had been unable to release the hostility and distaste she had for her mother. So Morgan and I decided that even though she was quite weak, she would give my seminar a try and work on releasing her toxic emotions. At a certain point in my seminars, I ask everyone to write down the 5 words that are hardest for them to own. We then do a mirroring exercise with partners until each person no longer has any emotional charge on any of their 5 qualities. For example, if one of my charged words was incompetent, I would say, "I am incompetent." And my partner, looking me in the eyes, would say, "You are incompetent." Then I would repeat, "I am incompetent." And she would repeat, "You are incompetent." This continues until it no longer matters to me if I am incompetent or if you call me incompetent. Just saying the word out loud over and over breaks down our resistance to being called that word and to having that quality. Before we start, I usually walk around the room and check people's lists because they often leave off words that are obvious to everyone else but hidden from themselves. When I arrived at Morgan's seat, she was busy owning her words, but I noticed the one word Morgan always used when she spoke about her mother was nowhere on her list. Knowing this was an important thing for her to own, I told Morgan's partner to work on the word insane. Morgan looked at me with disgust. She said, "I'm not insane, and you know it." Once again, I said, if we are everything, then how could she not be insane? I told her she could call me insane, and I wouldn't mind a bit. Morgan's partner didn't care if we called her insane either. Morgan squirmed, then cried, then told us she felt she might vomit. She couldn't say she was insane. The word could not come out of her mouth. Morgan's partner and I both looked at her and shouted, "Insane, say it, own it, Morgan, insane. I asked, tell me, Morgan, when in your life have you been insane? Morgan recounted a few incidents that clearly could have been considered insane, but the word still stopped her. All I wanted to hear her say was, I'm insane. I knew if she could repeat this word long enough, it would lose all its energy and the grip it had on her life. What we fear appears, and for Morgan, insanity came in the form of her disease. She had no freedom, but now she was on the brink of owning her greatest fear and nightmare. Morgan went home that night able to say, I'm insane, but still she did not completely feel it. Later, though, after a warm bath and a few hours of saying the word over and over to herself, she got it. A few months later, she wrote me a letter. Dear Debbie, I had to break any fear and everything that I went through as a child that I associated with insanity to own insane. I had to embrace it and let it go. Once I owned it, I dropped to my knees and started praying. Dear God, please remove the scales from my eyes. Let me see only the beauty in my mother. For the next 45 minutes, I prayed with the most authentic fervor to remove the judgment I had against my mother and myself, to accept that she had done the best she could. I prayed that I could forgive myself for the unconscious blaming, for being hurtful toward myself, for not loving myself, and for becoming ill. I was bathed by an exquisite peace. Prior to the work, the mere thought of my mother would make me cringe and tense up. Now I felt only peace. The exercise had opened the gate. I had walked through it. The cancer stopped spreading and began to slowly recede. Morgan is now cancer-free. Tests show no signs of the disease. When she stopped hating aspects of herself, she was able to forgive herself and her mother. Today, she tells me that owning the word insane was the hardest part of the process. Her eyes were sealed shut when it came to seeing her mother within herself. But once she realized she was dying of resentment, she allowed herself to embrace the totality of her being. Owning your shadow restores your body's natural tendency toward wholeness. When you are whole, you are healed. Transformation itself only takes seconds. It is a shift in perception, a change in the lenses we look through. If we see the world as if we're a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. If we shift from being a hammer to a bolt, then everything looks like a nut. Our perceptions are always colored by how we see ourselves and the decisions we make about what is good and bad, right and wrong, what we like and what we don't like. If you shift lenses from I'm in the world to I am the world, you will understand that it's not only okay to be everything, but it's essential. I know this is a difficult concept for most people to accept. We're taught never to say negative things about ourselves. If I wake up feeling worthless, I'm supposed to pretend that I don't feel that way. I'm supposed to say to myself that I'm worthy and hope I will come to feel worthy later in the day. I have to go to work pretending I feel worthy because feeling worthless is not okay. I have to hide behind my mask of worthiness all day, hoping no one will see through it. But inside, I'll feel a quiet despair knowing I'm not being myself, all because I'm unable to embrace being worthless. We resist this aspect of ourselves and pass judgments on the kind of person that is worthless. We are told affirmations will make us okay. But as I tell people in my lectures, if we put ice cream on top of poop, after a few spoonfuls, we will taste the poop again. When we integrate negative traits into ourselves, we no longer need affirmations because we'll know that we're both worthless and worthy, ugly and beautiful, lazy and conscientious. When we believe we can only be one or the other, we continue our internal struggle to only be the right things. When we believe that we are only weak, nasty, and selfish, traits that we believe our friends and family don't possess, we feel shame. But when you own all the traits in the universe, you understand that every aspect within you has something to teach you. These teachers will give you access to all the wisdom in the world. Sometimes, in order to own a trait, you've got to release some stored-up anger at yourself or at others. People often ask me if it's okay to be angry at themselves. My answer is that it's okay to feel whatever you are feeling. Allow yourself to feel and express everything that is within you. You need to get all this negative emotion out before you'll be able to truly love yourself, to feel compassion for yourself and others. You deserve to express your emotions in a healthy way. The only time it's not okay to express your emotions is when you're hurting another person. Screaming is a good way to let out pent-up emotions. Often our voices have been literally suppressed and we're unable to use our entire vocal range. When you allow yourself to scream completely, with every ounce of your being, you can really clear out repressed energies. If you don't want to disturb anyone, scream into a pillow. If you have never really screamed, or if you grew up in a home where there was a lot of screaming, you may have decided screaming was wrong. Now we're back to what you can't be with won't let you be. So scream. It's important to have access to your entire range of emotions. One of my seminars included a beautiful woman in her late 60s who hadn't ever raised her voice in her entire life. Janet had never screamed, never uttered a curse. Her father had drilled into her the idea that nice people didn't do such things, and if she was to be respected and loved by him, she would have to obey his rules. For 60 years, Janet had done exactly what she had been told, and now she was having reoccurring polyps in her throat. When she finally found me, she was ready to release all the emotion that was stuffed inside her and disobey her father. She had come to believe that the cause of her health issues was suppressed emotion. Still, she could hardly raise her voice. For 5 days, we yelled, screamed, and cursed. Then the moment came when we said the F word. What a release! Janet's whole body shook. The entire next day, she walked around with a huge grin on her face. It had taken every ounce of courage she had to do this work, even though her father was long dead. 6 months later, Janet was feeling great and her throat was completely clear. She was expressing herself joyfully and felt she had finally made peace with herself and her father. As long as we are not hurting others, we should joyfully express our rage. When you come face to face with an aspect of yourself that you hate, express it. Express it with the intention of releasing all your judgments, your shame, your pain, and your resistance to taking back this disowned aspect of yourself. My favorite way to release anger is batting. I take a plastic bat and a couple of pillows. Then I kneel down in front of my stack of pillows, raise the bat over my head, and hit those pillows as hard as I can. I imagine that my stack is whatever trait I've resisted owning and whack away. After I release all that emotion, it becomes much easier to go to the mirror and own a trait. If we embrace it internally, we no longer have to create it externally. One of my close friends, Jennifer, was convinced that she was being stalked. Jennifer would see the same woman at all the public events she attended. She was sure the woman was following her. "She's evil," Jennifer would tell me. Of course, being the good friend I am, I told Jennifer, "You are evil." She'd get furious with me and hang up the phone screaming, "I'm not evil." For nearly a year, this woman kept showing up everywhere Jennifer went and always ruined Jennifer's night. Toward the end of that year, Jennifer flew to Hawaii for a conference. She'd been looking forward to the meeting for months. Sure enough, the woman showed up at the first lecture. Jennifer was horrified. She called me from Hawaii. "What do I have to do to get rid of this woman?" I told her this woman must be mirroring a disowned aspect of herself. It was obvious Jennifer needed to own whatever it was because she was so plugged into this woman. I asked her, "What judgments do you have about being evil?" Jennifer told me, of course, it was awful to be evil and evil people did bad things. We tried to think of times in her life she'd been evil, and she came up with a few incidents when she'd done mean things to her little sister that could be considered evil. She had felt deeply shameful of those moments and had decided to be a good person. In her mind, good people were not evil. I explained that we couldn't know good without knowing evil, just as we couldn't know love without knowing hate. If we can own the evil or the hate in ourselves, we wouldn't need to project it onto other people. I told Jennifer to try standing in front of the bathroom mirror and saying to herself, "I am evil," until she no longer cared about denying this aspect of herself. After an hour in front of the mirror, Jennifer was so angry she sat down and wrote a letter to the woman she believed was stalking her. Jennifer allowed herself to call this woman all the nasty names she could think of to express all her rage. She was radically honest, and as a result, she felt lighter and better. Jennifer had needed to give voice to her pain and anger. After writing the letter, she tore it to shreds, went back to the mirror, and owned her evil. Once she could face this aspect of herself, she could also face this woman. She unplugged. When Jennifer saw the woman the next day, she said hello and walked away without being affected at all. She never saw the woman again. This is freedom. The pain of our perceived flaws compels us to cover them up. When we deny certain aspects of ourselves, we overcompensate by becoming their opposite. Then we create entire personas to prove to ourselves and others that we are not that. Recently, while visiting a close friend, I started talking to her father about my work. Norman is a perfect example of this phenomenon. Intrigued, he had asked me to show him what I did. So I asked him to tell me 2 words he wouldn't want said about him in the newspaper. He replied he would not want to be called dull or stupid. I laughed out loud. "Exactly," I said. "No one who knows you today would ever say you were dull or stupid." Because he always put his family first, Norman had never taken the time to finish his education. But after the death of his wife of more than 30 years, Norman had gone back to school to get a master's degree. He had enrolled in a program at a university near his home and had ridden his bike to school daily. He graduated with honors and is now working toward his PhD. When he is not in school, Norman is traveling all over the country, going to conferences and lecturing on physical health and the aging process. He recently went to a Buddhist retreat for a month to get in touch with his spirituality. Would anyone meeting Norman consider him dull or stupid? Everyone I know would call him courageous, interesting, and bright. But Norman's decision not to be dull and stupid actually runs his life and results in his always competing with himself to prove that he's not dull or stupid. No matter how hard he works, he always has to do more to make sure he's never exposed and show the world that he's smart and interesting. It was fairly easy for Norman to recognize how his life is run by the words dull and stupid. He always feels that whatever he achieves is not enough. The irony, of course, is that dull and stupid have given him his enormous drive and determination. They force him to seek out interesting people and places. If he didn't have this terrible aversion to these two words, we don't know if Norman would have had the drive to do everything he's accomplished in the past 4 years. Norman perceived the gifts of these two aspects and understood that he is everything. How can we know smart unless we know stupid? How can we know interesting without knowing dull? When you are internally driven by not wanting to be something, you often become the opposite. This robs you of your right to choose what you really want to do with your life. Norman has no freedom just to take time off and vacation with friends. He won't read a novel or spend an evening playing bridge for fear that he might turn into an old man who is dull and stupid. He cannot look to see if these opportunities are best for his health or for his soul. When you don't own an aspect of yourself, it runs your life. If we look closely, all of us see where we're dull and stupid. If we're honest and aren't displaying these aspects right now, then we have to identify a time when we've been dull or stupid in the past. Our opinions of ourselves are the most important opinions. If we feel good about our own lives, we seldom care what others say. In Norman's case, he has spent the last 3 years buried in books, working feverishly to be in the top of his class. Some people would say he's dull because all he does is study. Others might say he's stupid to be wasting his time going to school. Until Norman can love the part of him that is dull and stupid and integrate these aspects into his psyche, he will be driven to prove to the world that he's smart and interesting. We exhaust our internal resources when we try not to be something. We are here to learn from all these parts of ourselves and make peace with them. To be truly authentic persons, we have to allow the aspects of ourselves that we love and accept to coexist with all the aspects of ourselves that we judge and make wrong. When we can lovingly hold all of these traits together in one hand without judgment, they will naturally integrate into our system. Then we can take off our masks and trust that the universe created each of us with a divine design. Then we can stand tall, embracing the world within. Exercises. In order to be completely free, we need to be able to own and embrace all the qualities that upset us and other people. Number 1. Refer to your list of words from Exercise 1 in Chapter 4. Sit or stand in front of a mirror and say each word over and over again. I am, and then add in the trait. Say it until the energy around the word disappears. It works. I've never had people fail this exercise if they are committed to owning a trait. If you get stuck and feel anger or rage at someone who has displayed this trait, or if you feel pissed off that you have this trait, take time out from the mirror, sit down, and write a hate letter to this trait. Expressing anger in this way is healthy. These letters are for your eyes only. You're not going to mail them or read them to anyone. You're going to write them as a way to release your built-up emotions. If you don't know what to say, start with, I am angry at you for, and then write as fast as you possibly can without thinking. Write anything that comes to your mind. Don't worry about grammar or about making sense. Just focus on releasing old emotions and toxicity. This exercise is a way of discharging toxic emotions stored in our bodies. If feelings arise during the process, stay with them. You may find it especially difficult to say those words that you have judged harshly. Even if you're crying, stay with the process. At some point, you will notice the charge you have had on the word releases spontaneously. Number 2, using the same list of words, see if you can identify times in your life when you have demonstrated these traits. If you cannot think of any time you have exhibited this trait, then ask yourself in what circumstances might it be conceivable for you to demonstrate this trait. Would anyone else say, I've demonstrated this trait? Write down your responses next to each word. Chapter 7, Embracing Your Dark Side. Most of us long to experience peace of mind. This is a lifelong pursuit, a task that calls for nothing less than embracing the totality of our being. Discovering the gifts of even our most hated qualities is a creative process that needs only a deep desire to listen and learn, a willingness to release dysfunctional judgments and beliefs, and a readiness to feel better. Your true self makes no judgments. Only our fear-driven egos use judgments to protect us. Protection that ironically prevents us from self-realization. We must be prepared to love all that we have feared. My grievances hide the light of the world, says A Course in Miracles. To get past your ego and its defenses, you need to get quiet, be brave, and listen to your inner voices. Behind our social masks lurk thousands of faces. Each face has a personality of its own. Each personality has its own unique characteristics. By having internal dialogues with these subpersonalities, you will turn your egotistical prejudices and judgments into priceless treasures. When you embrace the messages of each aspect of your shadow, you begin to take back the power you've given to others and form a bond of trust with your authentic self. The voices of your unembraced qualities, when allowed into your consciousness, will bring you back into balance and harmony with your natural rhythms. They will restore your ability to resolve your own issues and illuminate the purpose of your life. These messages will lead you to discover authentic love and compassion. Until I started communicating with my subpersonalities, I had to rely on others to help me find out what was wrong with me. I went from one therapist to another. I tried local psychics, fortune tellers, and astrologists to get the answers I needed. If I felt there was something wrong with me, if I was feeling angry or sad or even overly happy, I would have to make a call or pay someone to tell me what was going on. What a way to live. If they told me something that I wanted to hear, I would think they were brilliant. But if they told me something I didn't want to hear, I would go to another person and another till I got the answer I was seeking. I knew there had to be a different way to live. Why would God make us so we can't understand ourselves? Why would God make us so we'd have to pay someone else to tell us about ourselves? Now I realize that we're brilliantly designed to heal ourselves and return to wholeness. But sometimes we can use a little help. Talking to our subpersonalities is an excellent exercise to advance the process. Examining our subpersonalities can be a tool to help us reclaim the lost parts of ourselves. First, we must identify these parts and then name them. Then we'll be able to disengage from them. Actually naming them creates distance. Roberto Assagioli, founder of psychosynthesis, says that we are dominated by everything from which our self becomes identified. We can dominate and control everything from which we disidentify ourselves. If I take one of my traits, which I don't like, for example, whiny, and then name it Whiny Wanda, it suddenly seems less threatening to me. In a funny way, as soon as I name these aspects of myself, I feel fondness for them. I can then stand back and look at them in an objective way. This process starts to loosen the grip these behaviors have on your life. My first experience with subpersonalities was in a transpersonal psychology class at JFK University in Orinda, California. Every week, we would learn and actually experience a different model of emotional healing. The week on psychosynthesis altered my life. I established a dialogue with different aspects of myself, which we called subpersonalities, and began to find out who they were and what they needed to be whole. The goal was to find their gifts, of course, and in finding each gift, I found acceptance of a disowned part of myself. Our teacher, Suzanne, started with a visualization that took us on an imaginary bus ride. She asked us to see a bus full of people. In my imaginary bus, I saw many different kinds of people. Some of them were old, some of them young. They were dressed in everything from miniskirts to bell-bottoms. I saw fat girls, skinny girls, girls with black hair, red hair, big chests, and flat chests. I saw every size and shape I could imagine. There were short people, tall people, circus people, people of every color and nationality. There were hookers and saints. It was a big bus crowded with people, many of whom I didn't want to know. My first thought was, oh no, you have to do better than this. Suzanne informed us that we'd have to get to know all of the people on our bus, the ones we liked, as well as the ones we didn't. Each of these passengers represented an aspect of myself who brought a special gift. They were all there, each offering something unique, if only I would meet them and listen to their wisdom. We were told to let ourselves get off the bus with one of our subpersonalities. And Big Bertha Big Mouth was right there reaching out to take my hand. She was the first subpersonality who wanted to have a conversation with me. When I saw her face, I thought, there is no way I'm going for a walk with this woman. I'll find another subpersonality to walk with. Bertha stood about 5 feet tall, weighed 200 pounds. She was in her 60s and was my worst nightmare in terms of appearance. She had thinning gray hair, which was poorly cut and sticking up in front of her face. She reeked of hairspray and cigarettes. She was wearing a beige muumuu with large orange polka dots. Wrapped around her shoulders was a beige polyester sweater held together by an old rusty pin. Her legs were fat and her stockings were torn. On her feet were badly worn plastic shoes. My eyes darted around, looking for someone to save me from Big Bertha. No one came forward. Bertha looked annoyed and finally just grabbed my hand and dragged me off the bus. She sat down on a nearby bench, and Bertha started to talk. She told me she was one of my subpersonalities, and I would have to learn to live with her. She said she was not going away, and if I would only open my closed mind, I would see that she had a lot to offer. Then Suzanne guided me to ask Big Bertha what she had to teach me. Big Bertha told me I shouldn't judge people by their looks. She said she could see right through my phony spiritual persona. I wanted to argue, but before I began, I realized that I had so much prejudice against Big Bertha when I saw her that I didn't even want to talk to her in the privacy of my own mind. Big Bertha went on to tell me that I'd never get any further in my spiritual development if I didn't deal with this issue. She reminded me that I'd always judged people whom I considered fat, and that the only people in my life were those whose external appearances I felt comfortable with. Deep inside, I knew Bertha was right. I pretended to be spiritually evolved and not swayed by any external things like appearances, but I was lying to myself. I had thought I had ended this behavior years earlier since I had done some work on this issue, but here was Big Bertha telling me to wake up. There was a lot more work to do. Suzanne told us to ask our subpersonalities what their gifts were. Big Bertha said her gift was wholeness. If I really believed I was part of this holographic universe, I would have to accept her whether I liked it or not. She said I would have to look in the eyes of everyone I met with love and compassion to see myself fully. And she told me that meeting her would be one of the most important encounters of my life. She was right. Big Bertha Big Mouth was a creation of my psyche based on an aspect of myself I couldn't accept. Through this guided visualization, she was able to express herself and teach me a great lesson. It took me months to fully integrate my experience. Everything about her was so real, so pure, so natural. How could this person be part of my subconscious? Where did she come from? How could she be so wise? I kept asking myself these questions. I wanted more of Bertha, even though I had been so resistant to accepting her. Slowly, I gathered the courage to get to the back of my bus and meet some more people. I led myself through the visualization and asked which subpersonality wanted to come out to meet me. In my first encounter alone with this wild group, Angry Alice came out to meet me. She was small and frail with bright red hair that stuck straight up in the air, bushy and teased. Her first words were, "Even though I'm small, I'm tough, so don't even think about messing with me." Alice said she was tired of me trying to get rid of her. She told me she was probably the best friend I'd ever have. My anger was there to guide me and warn me, and when I was in danger, Alice screamed in my face. Since I'd always ignored her clues, she had to act out and scream at everyone around me to get my attention. She told me her gift was my strong intuition that would always lead me to healthy relationships. She said the reason I rarely experienced healthy relationships was because I was too busy talking instead of listening to my inner voices. It was hard to embrace Angry Alice since I'd always believed that I expressed my anger in inappropriate ways. I'd been trying for years to get rid of my anger. But Alice didn't need to disappear. She needed acceptance and love. She wanted me to listen to my heart instead of my head. When I started thinking of Alice as my ally, she started to calm down. Healthy, sensible expressions of anger took the place of my uncontrollable outbursts. Next, I met gorging Greta, who liked to eat whole chocolate cakes, and trashy Trixie, who liked to wear really short skirts and had a foul mouth. Gorging Greta waddled over to tell me she was a close friend of Big Bertha Big Mouth. Her gift was compassion and interrelatedness to all other human beings. She also told me to slow down and pay attention to myself. Greta said that I'm completely unconscious of how fast I'm running around. I'm a doing machine, and she's the one who freaks out, gorging herself on food in order to feel grounded. Trashy Trixie, on the other hand, came with the gift of grace. She wanted me to treat myself like royalty and behave in a dignified manner. When I didn't, she exploded and had to act out by showing off and being the center of attention. As I explored the positive side of all these negative traits and began to embrace them, they stopped running my life. They were my psyche's great teachers. As soon as I responded to their requests to love them or just to slow down, they became an integrated part of my consciousness and enriched my sense of self-love and wholeness. When I embraced these qualities, it was no longer necessary to eat a whole pint of ice cream or wear skirts that were too short. As soon as I accepted my new friends, they stopped showing up in my life. I learned this technique when I was living in San Francisco with a man named Rich. We found it an amusing way to talk about each other's shadows. On a long drive, we made a list of each other's sub-personalities that seemed to show up frequently in our relationship. It looked like this: Debbie, resistant Rita, angry Alice, dominating Dixie, processing Priscilla, Princess Paulina, Yolanda the Yogi, controlling Carrie, lover girl Lori, and righteous Renee. Rich's list: dominating Dick, know-it-all Nick, my way Marvin, Jimmy the Jock, lover boy Benny, competent Ken, Tommy the teacher. We had a lot of laughs putting together our lists, but we had found a serious way to talk about the parts of each other that seemed to give us the hardest time without creating any upsets in our relationship. When issues came up, I was able to stop pointing my finger at Rich. Instead of saying, "You're trying to dominate me, I don't like it," I was able to say, "It feels like dominating Dick is out today. Could you talk to him for me?" This automatically drained the tension between us because it never seemed like a personal attack. If I started to process what Rich was saying to me, which I often did, he would just tell processing Priscilla he wasn't in the mood to be processed. I never took this personally, though taking things personally had always been one of my biggest issues in relationships. Subpersonalities reveal behaviors which we find unacceptable within ourselves. We shut them out because we couldn't or wouldn't accept them. Because I had closed off certain parts of myself, I was out of touch with the totality of my being. When I looked inside, I discovered these traits were screaming for my attention, and they guided me toward the next step in the transformation of my life. I've come to believe we have as many subpersonalities as we have traits. I have uncovered at least 100 of my own, and whenever I look, I can always find a new face, a new voice, a new message. Even the darkest subpersonalities come bearing gifts. We just have to be willing to spend some time with each of them in order to hear their voice of wisdom. You must be willing to spend time exploring your own inner world. In Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God, God reminds us, if you do not go within, you go without. If you take this message seriously, it can change your life. When you go within and form a relationship with your entire being, You begin to recognize your ability to steer your life in the direction you choose. There is no greater gift you can give yourself than when you say, I want more money, more love, more creativity, more friends, or a healthier body. You will have the faith you need to manifest it. Trust is always a major issue when you begin a dialogue with your internal voices. The most common question seems to be, how will I really know if I'm hearing my inner truth? After a few visits with your subpersonalities, it becomes easy to distinguish whether you are talking to a subpersonality or listening to negative chatter. Your negative internal voice will seldom have a positive message or a gift for you. There are many ways to help yourself get to an authentic place within. Meditating can be an ideal way to quiet the mind and its negative internal chatter. If you don't have a regular meditation technique, it may help to buy a meditation tape to give you some direction. Having someone guide you through a series of breathing and body relaxation techniques will help you get out of your head. Another quick and easy thing to try is dance. Put on some beautiful light music and just let yourself go for a half hour or so. Then sit down, close your eyes, and start to follow your breath. Once you are in a truly quiet place, you'll be able to distinguish your head from your heart. It takes some practice, but once you make the distinction, it makes the process of finding and exploring your subpersonalities much easier. Your head can be heartless. Your heart, though it will be straight and tough at times, will always be full of compassion. It's important to receive your subpersonalities with welcoming arms. Easy to say, but not always easy to do. This is one time when expecting the worst may work in your favor. Then what you get will probably be much better than you thought. People are often shocked by the cast of characters they call up, but that's usually because they were expecting a busload of angels. Subpersonalities might be headless or appear as animals, monsters, or aliens. Whatever you experience in your psyche during a visualization is the right image for you. It's important not to judge whom you meet or what you experience. It's also common to see people you know, ex-lovers, old bosses, family members, usually someone you didn't get along with. When these familiar faces show up in your subconscious, resist the urge to blink them away. Stay with them and find out what they're trying to teach you. You may be able to forget about them for now, but if you don't deal with their issues, you'll end up meeting them again and again in your life. This isn't a card game where you can throw back the subpersonalities you don't want for new ones. In fact, the personalities you least want to see will have the greatest lessons for you. Recently, I worked with a woman who seemed to have it all. Not many women have achieved the level of success, fame, and fortune that Shelley has. She climbed the ladder of success in the entertainment industry and worked very hard to get to the top. She got mostly positive press, but was very sensitive to criticism. After years of going at a pace too fast for most people, Shelley took a few months off to work on herself. She had realized she often acted aggressive, but hated this part of herself. When she said, "I am aggressive," her face tightened up and tears came to her eyes. She couldn't live with this aspect of herself. We sat facing each other for a while, and I just had her say over and over, "I am aggressive. I am aggressive." Shelley was still feeling uncomfortable with this aspect of herself, so I had her close her eyes and took her on a bus ride. We called up a subpersonality which she named Aggressive Allie. Allie had big teased red hair and was in her mid-50s. She was dressed in a navy business suit and had a powerful presence. At first, Shelley didn't like her, but we asked Aggressive Allie what her gift was to Shelley. Allie said protection. Allie told Shelley that she had protected her while she built her career. Allie said she had made sure no one got in Shelley's way and that no one hurt her or stopped her from attaining her dreams. Then she asked Aggressive Allie what she needed to be whole. Allie wanted love and acceptance. She was tired of being this big, awful, mean woman who Shelley beat up on. Allie was the person who had made all Shelley's fame and recognition possible. Now she wanted some credit. In her opinion, she wasn't asking for a lot from Shelley, only love and appreciation for the part she played in Shelley's life. Shelley lay on my couch with a huge grin on her face. She was ecstatic. She had fallen in love with Aggressive Allie. She embraced a part of herself that she'd been trying to bury for years. This quality had caused her shame and self-loathing. The paradox was that by not embracing her aggressiveness, Shelley had been robbed of enjoying the gifts of her success. Shelley was now free to enjoy the fruits of her labor. This is often how it works. You have a quality which has a gift for you. You call on the gift to help get something you want in life. Then, because this aspect of yourself is not fully integrated into your psyche, and because you've made some negative judgment about it, it takes on a life of its own, acting out in inappropriate ways. Until we embrace the qualities from which we've disassociated ourselves, they will continue to act up until their needs are met. Remember, what you resist persists. When Shelley had accepted Aggressive Allie, her anguish about being aggressive vanished. Now she's free to use this aspect of herself only when and if it's appropriate. Another useful way to embrace your traits is inviting other people into your consciousness to get their perspective on disowned aspects. Visualize someone you admire and respect, perhaps someone who is holy or spiritual. Now concentrate on one of the words that you still find hard to embrace. Ask the person you've chosen how they would interpret this aspect of yourself. Make sure you pick someone who is wise and compassionate, or try it with someone important from your past, preferably a parent or family member. Here's an example from my own life. My word is sloppy. Since I don't approve of this part of myself, I try to hide it from the world. I orchestrate my life so that I have a nanny who takes care of my son and cleans my house. She keeps everything clean and in perfect order. Even though I'm not the one who keeps my surroundings impeccable, this is the way I like my home to look. No one ever calls me sloppy because my home is always neat and clean. But if someone said Debbie Ford is a slob, it would affect me. So I close my eyes, take some slow, deep breaths, and think about the word sloppy. It makes me feel a little sick and tight. Underneath that is the feeling of fear. I trace the feeling into my past and remember my mother yelling at me for being sloppy. I was afraid I wouldn't be loved if I was a sloppy person. With my eyes closed, I picture Mother Teresa in my heart, and I ask her how I could reinterpret the word so I am no longer hateful of sloppy. I say to her that I want to put love on this word, and then I allow myself to hear her voice. She replies by telling me my sloppiness is play. It's the way I express the child in me. Throwing clothes on the floor is fun for me, and I can stop making it wrong. She tells me the gift of sloppiness is order. Because I grew up always being reminded what a slob I was, I now have a unique ability to organize everything and have it look perfect. Now I have one new powerful interpretation. Then I close my eyes again, and I ask Martin Luther King Jr. to give me a new interpretation for my sloppiness. I picture him in my heart, and he says that because I have so much passion for life, I have an urgency to go on to the next thing. This shows up as my sloppiness. I'm too excited to tend to the little things, like putting things back where they belong. He says my passion and enthusiasm are the gifts of my sloppiness. By taking responsibility for my sloppiness and hiring someone to take care of those things that I don't like to do, I can take care of more important business. Interpretation 2. Now I'm starting to love my sloppiness. Feeling brave, I visualize my mother, who always criticized my sloppiness. I asked her for a new, powerful interpretation. She says, "The reason I always criticized you for being sloppy was because I was jealous that I never had the internal freedom to just throw a piece of clothing on the floor and leave it there." She said she was always rigid with herself, even as a child, and couldn't stand anything out of place. My sloppiness was a reminder of her rigidity. That's why it upset her so much. She went on to tell me my sloppiness gave me the gift of self-expression. When I was young, I loved to paint. I just dove in and tried different colors and strokes. Sometimes I used my hands. I was never afraid to try something for fear of making a mess. My sloppiness gave me freedom. Interpretation 3. I could go on, but in fewer than 10 minutes, I had a new respect for my sloppiness. Now it feels like a loving, positive characteristic that has given me many gifts. I can really see that I was just having fun and expressing myself. Now when I close my eyes and think about the word sloppy, I feel open and receptive. Love heals, and it's sometimes just a matter of inventing a new interpretation of a feeling or an experience. As you go about embracing your disowned traits, it can be useful to retrace the steps that led you to believe that a certain quality was bad in the first place. Going back to the time when a characteristic began to have power over you enables you to expose the origin of your ego-driven judgment. My friend Peter was having trouble embracing his weakness, so I asked him to close his eyes and find an image from his past that exemplified his weakness. His first memory was of high school, when he chose a different sport every season because he felt inadequate and uncompetitive. He recalled feeling weak among his classmates at an all-boys private school. I asked Peter to go deeper and find an even earlier incident. Then Peter remembered a time when he was 8 years old. He was visiting the site where his family was building their new home. The stairs leading to the second level had no backs, so you could see through them to the floor below. Peter remembered his mother and sister leading him up to see his new room. But when Peter was ready to leave, his mom and sister had already gone back down the stairs. He was afraid to climb down alone for fear he might slip through the holes in the steps. Seeing his mother and sister on the first floor, he called to them, but they refused to help. His mother told him he'd have to do it alone or they'd leave him behind. Paralyzed by fear, Peter stayed put. His mother and sister left and didn't return for half an hour. At that point, he internalized the lesson: if I'm weak, women will leave me. Since then, Peter couldn't be weak because he believed it would cause women who love him to leave. Most of us are driven by the 8-year-old within us. That child who didn't get his needs met is begging for acceptance. So it's useful to delve into your memory as far back as possible. From that place, you can more easily find compassion for an aspect of yourself. Peter was a tough guy for years, and his relationships with women never lasted more than 6 months. He always left them. By retracing his disowned weakness, Peter was able to find the origin of its power. By facing this early incident, he was able to own his weakness. To help him embrace this aspect, I asked Peter to choose 2 people he admired who had an abundance of compassion and humanity. He chose the Buddha and the Dalai Lama. Bringing the Buddha forth in his mind, Peter asked what the gift of his weakness was. The Buddha responded by saying it gave Peter a deep compassion for other people's weaknesses. From the Dalai Lama, Peter learned that his weakness was the source of his dynamic personality and his ability to make other people comfortable in social situations. Feeling weak provided him with a strong desire to develop a loving and engaging external persona. Then I asked Peter to think of one of his parents. With his eyes closed, he brought his father into his consciousness. His father told him that by always having to overcome his weakness, Peter learned to be resilient and bounce back from all kinds of situations. Because Peter couldn't accept his weakness, he had always taken the hard road to prove how strong he was. He needed to show the world his strength by creating a life full of mishaps, wrong turns, and missed opportunities. Peter's father predicted that if he started to learn these lessons and embraced his weakness, he would start manifesting the easy road. Recently, I learned that Peter is writing music, a passion of his which he never thought would be a viable career path. Instead of starting a new job and a new relationship every 6 months, Peter is channeling his energy into writing songs and producing a demo tape of his work. He is learning to create a world without suffering, a world where it's safe to express his emotions and his creativity. If we don't shift our perceptions of our true selves, we'll be stuck repeating our past behaviors. Your subpersonalities can tell you what work is left unfinished and what you have to do to resolve reoccurring patterns. They will tell you what you need to do to learn a specific lesson. If you're willing to listen, you will find your subpersonalities are funny, resourceful, honest, and forgiving. The wisest people in the universe when it comes to yourself. This is because they're giving you answers that come from within you. You can access anybody you know by going within. All you have to do is get quiet and call forth that person in your subconscious. And when you visualize a particular person and start a dialogue with him, you can ask anything you want. You can ask what he thinks about a particular issue and what advice there is for you. Everyone's voice can be found inside of you. The answers you need from all the people come from within. All your unresolved relationships and all your lovers, family members, and friends, and heroes and gurus, all the people you have shut out or have shut you out. Each one of these people can speak to you and speak through you. A couple of years ago, I was having a difficult time trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. During this period, I closed my eyes and asked myself, whom should I go to for some advice? There was a man I'd gotten to know years earlier whom I respected tremendously. My friend Steve's face appeared to me. For days I went back and forth in my mind trying to decide if I should bother him. It seemed somewhat inappropriate to call him about my career decisions and boyfriend problems. We weren't really friends anymore. One day during my meditation, I attempted to visualize Steve and ask him what he thought I should do. I'd never tried this before, but I knew I had nothing to lose. The most astonishing thing happened. Steve started talking to me. He told me he was glad I'd come to him for help, and he answered all of my questions clearly and concisely. When I finished, it felt like I had just spent an hour with the real Steve, receiving his wisdom and feeling his love. It was an amazing, eye-opening experience. Simple, direct, and to the point. I didn't even have to leave my house or spend money on a phone call. For months, I called on the Steve within me to guide me on my path. I'd found a friend and confidant within myself. My girlfriend Sarah used a similar technique with me after my father passed away. I went to see her in the middle of my grieving when I was feeling particularly sad that my father would never get to know my son, Beau. Sarah had me close my eyes and visualize my father playing with my son. It was as though my father was standing right in front of me, telling Beau he'd always be there to protect him. My father told Beau how much he himself loved music and hoped Beau would also find joy and beauty in music and play one of the instruments he had left behind. This was a moving and extremely valuable experience. It changed the way I felt about the loss of my father. When I left the session with Sarah, I was sure my father would always be there to guide and comfort me, and that I could bring him close to Beau by sharing his love of music with Beau. The feeling of loss shifted from a hopeless, sinking feeling of despair to one of optimism. Your subpersonalities are there waiting for you. Go in and reclaim them. They want nothing more than attention and acceptance. They are the voices of your future, not your past. They will always be there to guide you, embrace you, and comfort you, whether they come in the form of someone you know or in the form of some shadowy figure. If you befriend yourself, you'll break the continuing cycle of loss of self or loss of others. What you'll find out is that we never lose anyone. Our relationships simply change form. Someone might not be there physically, but will always be there within us. By reclaiming everything you hate about yourself, you open up a world within where you have access to the entire universe. We each have the capacity to give ourselves everything we need to be happy and whole. When we reconnect with our whole selves, it's virtually impossible to feel lonely, isolated, or left out. We need to find the universe within us and learn how to love, honor, and respect that universe. Then we can accept the magnitude of ourselves. When we discover the magic of the world within, we stand in awe of ourselves. With that awe comes peace, satisfaction, and gratitude for our humanity. Every single subpersonality has a gift for you. Every aspect of you, whether you like it or not, can benefit your life. To think there is only darkness is to deceive yourself. There is light in every part of us, in every part of the universe. To not find our gifts is to reject the extraordinary design of life. Our souls long to learn these valuable lessons. We need to stop judging our soul's journey and trust in the design of our humanity and eternal goodness. There is an ancient saying, all things must grow or they die. Our highest purpose is to learn and grow from our experiences and then move on. Once we receive the benefit of our traits, we are free to choose the experiences we desire. Exercise. Do this exercise when you are very relaxed, after a walk or a bath. You're going to meet your inner voices, so you want to have your mind as quiet as possible. Early in the morning or before you go to bed is also a good time. Make sure you have a pen and a piece of paper close by. And then when you're ready, just take a slow, deep breath, closing your eyes, allowing yourself to sink down deep inside. And take another slow, deep breath, retaining the breath for 5 or more seconds, and then slowly exhaling out, allowing each exhale to take you deeper and deeper. And as you sink down inside yourself, I want you to imagine that you see a big yellow bus. And the door is open. And that you take a step onto this bus, walk toward the middle, and have a seat. Allow yourself to feel excited about taking this long-awaited trip. Imagine riding down the street on a clear, beautiful day. You're sitting there minding your own business, and someone taps you on the shoulder. You look up and this person says, "Hello, I'm one of your subpersonalities." And all the other people on this bus are also your subpersonalities. Why don't you get up now and walk around and see who's on your bus? You get up from your seat and you walk through the entire bus looking at all the different people in their seats. You see before you every kind of person. Tall people, short people, teenagers, and old people. There might be circus people, animals, and homeless people. With you on the bus are people of every race, color, and creed. Some of them are waving to get your attention. Others may be hiding quietly in the corner. Continue to walk through the aisle, slowly visualizing all the characters on your bus. Now the bus driver directs you to allow one of your subpersonalities to take you for a walk off the bus in a nearby park. So just take a slow, deep breath. Take your time and allow one of your subpersonalities to come and take your hand and escort you off the bus into the park. Sit down next to this person and ask his or her name. Ask that person to tell you what trait he or she represents along with a name. For example, if you meet someone angry, you could name this person Angry Alfred or Angry Anne. If you don't hear a name, you can give that person one, any name but your own. Take all the time you need. Notice how this person is dressed, how they look, what they smell like. Notice his or her mood and body language. And now take another slow, deep breath. And I want you to ask them, what is your gift to me? What is the gift that you are trying to give me? Or the lesson that you are trying to teach me? Just take your time, breathe right into it. What is your gift to me? What are you trying to teach me? And after you have received the gift, ask this subpersonality, this part of you, what do they need to be whole? What do they need to be a healthy, whole part of you so that you can integrate them into your psyche? Just breathe in and I'll ask it again. What do you need to be whole? You want to find out what they need to become a healthy, integrated part of your psyche. And after you have heard every answer, ask this person, is there anything else you need to say to me? Just allow yourself to hear any other information they want to deliver to you. And when you are finished, make sure you acknowledge and walk this person back to the bus. Take another slow, deep breath. And when you're ready, begin to float back up and open your eyes and write down the messages you received from your subpersonality. Take at least 10 minutes to journal about your experience. Don't worry if you did not get all the answers you needed from your subpersonality. It takes time and practice to hear all of their messages, so you can do this process over again. This is an exercise that requires you to surrender to yourself, so make sure you have created a safe environment for the process. Chapter 8. Reinterpreting Yourself. When left unhealed, the past will destroy our lives. It buries our unique gifts, our creativity, and our talents. And when these parts of ourselves go unclaimed, they stagnate inside of us. We use them against our world instead of in harmony with it. We think we're mad at the world, that we want to change the world, that if only the world were different, we'd be able to live our dreams. But it's we who need to change. We're angry at ourselves for not persisting, for not honoring the God force inside us, for not giving ourselves permission to express ourselves as we truly desire. We think we're mad at our parents for repressing us early in life. Actually, we're angry at ourselves for perpetuating that repression. It's as if a long time ago, someone put us in a cage, and although the cage hasn't been there for years, we still struggle against its imaginary walls. The cage is our self-imposed limitations, our self-doubt, and our fear. We were taught that it's hard work to go after our dreams. We may not have understood that it's even more difficult living day in and day out with the knowledge that we don't pursue them. We are left without desire, which is the key to fulfilling our full spiritual potential. We are left with desperation, which builds up slowly and expresses itself in our bodies as disease and in our psyche as rage. If we're unwilling to make peace with the past,